Good morning to you. You. Good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning. Good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning. Good morning to you. You. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. You. Good morning. Good morning to you. And many more. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. And welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host today, Shantae Charles. I first of all want to thank you for your time and attention as we get started on today. It is Teachable Tuesday, and I hope that you are ready to learn something new. Maybe something you didn't know before. Maybe what we share today might confirm some things to you. But I wanted to go ahead today and talk about some things that I have been alluding to on some of my posts, but I wanted to make sure that you all saw the books. I'm going to do some reading excerpts from some of the books. Some of these books have racial slurs in them. I'm going to try to tone down the racial slurs as I come across them. Um, but in the books, they are full racial slurs. Okay. Um, so, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about some of the books that are out here that will help you to understand what you are seeing right now. Two of the books that we're going to look at, and I'll be reading some excerpts from, are from people who are journalists and investigative reporters who went into the spaces of the alt right, spaces of the far right, and did their journalistic work. As one writer said, he witnessed certain things that he could not fully intervene in because it would have been unsafe for him to do so. And so, two of these books, you might not have heard of them. One of them I know most people have heard of, but this first one is called The Cruelty is the Point. The Cruelty is the Point. And like I said, I'm going to be reading some excerpts. We're going to go from, today, we're going to go from some of the worst stuff all the way over into Black empowerment. But we're going to start here because I think that more people need to understand what is happening. A lot of times I hear people say, well, are y'all surprised? Are y'all shocked? Why are y'all surprised? Why are y'all shocked? These people are this way. This one thing to say that, it's another thing to actually know who your enemy is, know what you're up against, and know what kind of strategies that you need to employ so that you not just have your boots on the ground, right? But that you also have your eyes and your ears open. Because yes, Black joy in this hour, in this moment is necessary, but so is understanding of who you're up against. And we cannot ignore that part of our education. To ignore it is to do so at your own peril. All right. So, this book, I highly recommend you get it. It's called The Cruelty is the Point: The Past, Present, and Future of Felon in Chief's America. Adam Sir, if you follow The Atlantic, he has been writing his tail off about some of the current things that is happening. But this particular book is about the presidency, the first term, and what happened and where the backlash came from. So he gives in this book a really good analysis of all of those things. Like I said, I'm gonna read some excerpts out of this toward the beginning. This first section is called The Cruelty of Backlash. Many people woke up on November 9, 2016, feeling like their country hated them. Felon-in-Chief had run a campaign that from its inception sought to blame those he defined as foreigners for the failures of modern society. He announced his campaign by declaring that Mexican immigrants were intimate assaulters, bringing drugs and crime. He called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States and regaled campaign audiences with apocryphal tales of how dipping bullets in pig's blood had helped Americans suppress Muslim insurgency in the Philippines. He decried the war on police, calling for nationwide stop and frisk and comparing Black American neighborhoods unfavorably to war zones. Every one of these problems, he assured his supporters, could be solved with the ruthless application of state force: arrest, execution, exclusion, or expulsion. So the things that we see now are just sped up because they were going on in his first term. And then, just short of a majority of 2016 voters, more than 60 million people decided to put him in charge of the country. So that was the first time, more than 60 million. The second time, more than 70 million. Okay, so between his break and layoff, he gained people. Yeah. If you were part of or related to one of the groups he targeted so effectively, you woke up on November 9th with the knowledge that some, perhaps many of your work colleagues, friends, family members, chose a person who promised to use the violence of the state to keep people like you in your place. Now he's not only doing that, but he is shipping people off to prisons that are innocent. Okay, so let me continue. I'm going to go to the second part of this, and this part is called "Is This the Second Redemption?" Between 1870 and 1901, there were 20 Black representatives in Congress and 2 Black United States senators. Between 1901 and 1929, there were none. Those simple numbers offer a small glimpse of the totality of the Southern counter-revolution against Reconstruction after the Civil War and the subsequent bloody Southern redemption, after which the political power of Black Southerners was effectively extinguished, and we know that they're trying to do that now. The radical dream of an interracial politics with its attendant federal investment and redistribution of resources towards the poor had been destroyed. The optimism of emancipation leading to racial equality in the South was annihilated with a completeness that is difficult to fathom. Southern redemption had been led by white Democrats and their paramilitary allies, but crucial to their decisive victory was the willingness, this is why we must know our history, was the willingness of the Republican Party to abandon Black Southerners to their fate. Many Northern Republicans also hoped to use the crisis to jettison a Reconstruction policy they believed had failed. The freedmen insisted former Ohio Governor Jacob D. Cox must moderate their new kindled ambition for political influence and recognize that they lacked whites' hereditary faculty of self-governing. They have always believed this. They continue to believe that Black people cannot self-govern. Okay? All right. The election of felon-in-chief the first time, and the complete dominance of the Republican Party, both in the federal government and in the states, may usher in a new era of redemption, one that could see the astounding racial progress of having a Black president relegated to little more than symbolism. So understand, when they use terms like redemption, they're not talking about redemption as many people would know it in terms of a spiritual term. They're talking about bringing back segregation, bringing back an unequal America, okay? Their goal was to erase the memory and turn the memory of a Black president having ever been in charge into little more than symbolism. In case you didn't know, they ended the lease, I believe, where the Obama administration was in terms of planning for his library. That was done a couple months ago. All right. The federal government currently protects people's ability to find a home. Do we still have that protection? To make a living. Well, we see what's happening with the federal workforce. To cast a ballot. Well, the SAVE Act is trying to strip away people's ability to do that. To worship freely. Oh, they're moving on to that too. To drink clean water and breathe clean air. At the time of this writing, the federal government was currently protecting all those things. A Trump administration can leave these rights unprotected for the people most vulnerable to having them denied because of the color of their skin or their faith without having to ask Congress for a single vote on legislation. He just told you what they're doing right now. The conservative backlash against Obama limited much of his agenda after the first 2 years to things that could be achieved by the executive branch. Felon in chief can easily reverse these steps, beginning with Obama's extension of relief from deportation to undocumented immigrants. That will affect some 750,000 people. Well, right now, we know that 900,000 people have been delivered an email telling them to get out of the country and they have 7 days. That was just delivered. He can shift deportation priorities so that undocumented immigrants previously considered a low priority for deportation, mothers with U.S. citizen children, for example, will no longer be. That proposal on Muslim immigration, he will not even need Congress. The entire civil rights enforcement apparatus of the federal government will be under the control of a candidate who campaigned on using the power of the state against religious and ethnic minorities, proposing to ban Muslim immigration, establish a deportation force to purge the country of America's largely Latino population of undocumented immigrants, and establish national stop and frisk, a policy that has targeted Black communities. This was written in 2021. I'm on page 9 of this book, and everything that this young man wrote, this journalist wrote, is now in play. Just understand that. The Obama administration's aggressive enforcement of anti-discrimination law in housing, employment, and voting is likely to suffer. The Obama era saw an unprecedented rise in the Justice Department's efforts to combat racial discrimination in local policing. Felon in Chief campaigned with the explicit support of unions representing law enforcement and on giving power back to the police. Will the Trump administration continue to enforce federal religious freedom laws in cases where local jurisdictions attempt to prevent mosques from being built? Will it advocate for Muslim women who are told by their employers they are not allowed to cover their hair? Would a Trump Equal Opportunity Employment Commission continue this aggressive interpretation of civil rights law? Should women who are intimately harassed by their bosses expect that a president who bragged about it will defend their rights? Will the strict rules on intimate assault on college campuses survive in Trump's Department of Education? Well, we know all of these things are not going to survive because he's literally dismantling the Department of Education right now. So I hope that you will pick up, go to your library, use the Libby app, buy the book, but I hope that you will add this to your collection so that you can understand how much has unraveled if you need some proper perspective. Okay. The second book that I talked about on last week is this book here, Everything You Love Will Burn. People were asking me, how did I hear about or how did I know about the far right and their engagement in the Black community in terms of shootings that have been happening? That people keep saying, oh, Black people, it's Black on Black crime. Black people need to, get it together. They need to stop killing one another. They need to stop shooting one another. Well, some of that is actually not Black people shooting each other. Yeah, some of that is not us. And you need to know that some of that is not us so that you are more aware when you are in your neighborhood and you are having great times with each other and great parties and you're outside and you're chilling and you're playing your music and you're barbecuing and you got your boots on the ground. I'm going to need you to actually also be aware so that you don't become a target and a casualty. Okay? Everything You Love Will Burn, inside the rebirth of white nationalism in America. This book is full of insider information from people who went on the inside of these organizations to find out what their mindset is, what are they thinking, what are they planning. This was written up to the rise of um, the first term of the presidency. These are all the people who were planning and concocting the first time, who are now, some of them are your congresspersons and your senators, and some of them are in positions of power now because they've just been placed there, who have these thoughts and ideologies. It's important to know who's leading our nation. I want to read to you from the chapter called National Unalive a White Person Day. That's the name of the chapter. Chapter 7. All right. This is an excerpt again. Where should I start here? Okay. Page 133. As far as he was concerned, the Klan should stick to what it did best, being a spiritual sanctuary for white Americans who cared for their race. The rest of the world could go to for all he cared. The KKK would endure like they always had. By the time their host came and joined them, they were sitting on camping chairs by a van drinking coffee. Dan's friend was there too, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. When did you guys get in last night? Johnny asked. Around 2. Was it a quiet night? Did you see anyone? I sat on the porch until about 1 a.m. without witnessing and without seeing a soul, said Miller. The Black civil rights leader, Louis Farrakhan, had made a speech a couple of days before where he said that Black people should fight back against those who tried to kill them. Members of various far-right groups believing that Farrakhan had encouraged African American death squads were now on high alert. Supposedly, today was the day when Black people would rise up. So October 10th, 2015 had become known by at least some as National Unalive a White Person Day. Outside of a misconstrued Farrakhan quote, there was no evidence that this was a real thing. There were no grand plans of unaliving white people, but the idea fit nicely into the besieged frames of mind of Klan members. If they weren't living under an existential threat as white people, then was there really a point to what they were doing? Did you hear Richard Preston went inward hunting last night? Dan said. Did he get any? I don't think so. He probably just rode around their neighborhoods for a bit. Then he'll be talking up a storm later. Yeah, we haven't seen him for a while. He's too busy having Obama arrested. Nothing ever seems to happen, though. Richard had been at least the last cross lighting at Johnny's property, the time they had spread Brian Delp's ashes, when the KKK leaders had all snuck off to discuss ways to bring the Klan back to its former glory. He had hinted at something big going down, but refused to give me specifics. In October, when the results of the talks were finally unveiled, Dan's predictions turned out to be overblown. So, yes, if you want to know if there are people, white supremacists, going around, driving around your neighborhoods and using Black people as target practice, you can read more about that in this book. Everything you love will burn. And maybe we can stop blaming Black people for everything that's going down. How about we do that? All right. Now that I've given you a little bit of excerpt about some things you probably should be reading about while you have your boots on the ground. Okay, nothing wrong with that. But let's also educate ourselves. I want to talk to you about the other side, and I'm using this historical example. I want to talk to you about this other side, which is supposed to be, some people say ally. I don't say ally. Allies to me are, how can I say it? What's the word I'm looking for? Allies are inconsistent. I think that's the word I want to use. Allies are inconsistent. When I think about people who are on our side that are not us, I think about co-conspiratorship. Allies can get their feelings hurt and decide, I'm out. Allies can decide they don't like the plan that you're putting together as Black people and try to take it over. Because again, there's a belief that Black people cannot self-govern, that we don't know how to plan for ourselves. Even though we've been surviving a generational genocide in this country for over 400 years, people still think that we don't know what we're doing in order to survive. So I'm not really a person that believes in allyship. I do believe in co-conspiratorship. Named Alexander Ross. Alexander Ross, and this is coming out of a book that I've shared here online, which I hope, again, you will pick up. It's called Many Thousand Gone. Stories about those who were freedom seekers and those who helped them seek freedom. Alexander Ross was a Canadian, a physician, and a naturalist who wrote frequently about birds and insects. He knew the effects of enslavement from seeing with his own eyes what it had done to fugitives going to Canada. But reading Uncle Tom's Cabin spurred him to action. He came to the United States and sought out abolitionist Gerrit Smith. Smith, in turn, introduced him to distinguished radicals of the day. They all agreed that with his scientific knowledge, Ross might very well invade the South, posing as a confused professor. Under that cover, he could help the cause of freedom for those enslaved, and that is exactly what he did. Because he was white and a gentleman, Ross could travel the South freely. He first went to Richmond, Virginia to watch people and to learn. Before long, he talked to 40 enslaved persons at a preacher's house, telling them about the routes north. These routes would take them along the Underground Railroad to safety. Ross gave the enslaved people, names of those who would help them and directions to their towns. He also asked them to pass the information on to other enslaved people who wanted to run away. Word got around that a Northerner was in the area giving the enslaved directions for escape. Alexander Ross was doing even more than that. He was providing the other fugitive groups with money, he provided them with weapons, he provided them with food, and he provided them with compasses. He quickly left the South for Pennsylvania before he could be captured. It was there that he developed a code for leading fugitives from one station on the underground to the next. In Ross's code, the number 29 was the town of Seville, Ohio. Medina, Ohio was the number 27. Hope was the code name for Cleveland, and Sunrise was for Sandusky. Midnight was the code name for Detroit, Michigan. One can imagine one of Ross's messages. We hope to sunrise at sunrise. Then we will rest by midnight. The message was marking the path of travel and the main towns where the enslaved would find help on the railroad. Going to Canada, a fugitive might enter the country from glory to God. Ross's code for Windsor, Ontario, or God be praised, another town. After a time, Alexander Ross returned to the South. Under cover of his scientific work, he moved from place to place, contacting the enslaved. No one ever realized that when they disappeared from a plantation, the Professor Ross was likely to be hunting rare insects in a field nearby. Ross continued his secret work from the last years of the 1850s until the first guns sounded at the beginning of the Civil War. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a co-conspirator. I just wanted to share his story so you would get a picture and an idea of what a co-conspirator looks like. Hope that helped. All right. I'm going to come now to one of my favorite writers, Bell Hooks, Rock My Soul, Black People and Self-Esteem. And I want to start her chapter 6, called Thinking Critically. Education for critical consciousness is necessary if we are to create a sustained cultural context for Black folks to have healthy self-esteem. During the period of racial segregation in our nation, when the vast majority of Black folks were involved in a politics of racial uplift, segregated schools were the location where Black students were encouraged to embrace education as the necessary path to freedom. In all our Black schools, we were taught standards of excellence in relation to both our academic studies and our construction of ourself and identity. Ethics and values we were taught in our schools mirrored those taught in home and in our spiritual places. In our schools, we were taught the value and importance of self-love. Since the very existence of segregated schools was a constant reminder of the way in which the white majority culture saw us as inferior, the all-Black school of the 50s and 40s was a place where the politics of racial uplift were constantly preached. We were told that we had to be smarter than our white peers, these peers that we never saw at the time. We had to be smarter than they were to embody a direct challenge to white supremacist thinking about the inferiority of our race. Like many African Americans who attended all Black schools in the segregated South and were compelled to desegregate in junior high or high school, I experienced firsthand the difference between the two educational systems. While our teachers in the all Black schools were not always as qualified as white teachers, while our materials were often not as current and overall resources were scarce, all Black environment, we were not only seen as able learners, we were expected to be high achievers. Clearly, there were students among us who resisted learning, students who failed, but there were many more students who excelled. In those schools where every teacher was Black, it was a given that Black folks should strive for academic excellence in every arena. In those days, it would have seemed ludicrous for anyone to suggest that striving to educate ourselves was a way to turn our backs on our Blackness. There were many folks in all Black schools who used white bourgeoisie culture as their standard to structure manners and etiquette, thus creating a culture of assimilation where whiteness was deemed better, even though no white people were around. And there were also progressive Black folks who had decolonized their minds, who knew firsthand the value of education for critical consciousness. who were interested in laying the groundwork for Black children to build healthy self-esteem. Whether one wanted to speak French, play the violin, recite Shakespeare daily, or focus on quantum physics, none of these choices meant that everyone was trying not to be Black. By failing to look at the way in which the segregated school where teachers and students were Black was a terrain of resistance when the issue was self-esteem, the civil rights activists who wanted to integrate schools so that Black children would have equal access unwittingly set the stage for the colonization of young Black minds by a poisonous pedagogy embedded in education at the hands of white colonizers. Now, again, Bell Hooks wrote this in 2003. And here we are in 2025. And I think a lot of people would agree with her that part of what happened through this, I like to say assimilation because it's really not integration. Um, Part of what happened through this process of Black people going into white spaces was, as she said, a pedagogy that was embedded that was not good for the minds of Black people. Schools were integrated late in the Southern world of my upbringing. My sense of self and Black identity had been firmly formed in the world of all Black schools where teachers were dedicated to both academic excellence and to laying the groundwork for healthy self-esteem. When the state demanded school desegregation, Black parents in our communities did meet to discuss whether integrated schools would be best for Black children to learn in. Even when they voiced grave doubts, there was the assumption that the first groups of Black children to enter, where overt white supremacy was the norm, were warriors for racial justice. We were prepared to sacrifice comfort for the cause of equality. Like so many Americans in the late 50s and early 60s, Black folks were convinced that racism was due simply to ignorance, that if folks knew better, then they would act better. Our parents never warned us about white teachers being racist. Most of our teachers were covertly racist. Like my beloved high school drama teacher, a young white woman, more liberal than conservative, but somewhere in between the two, who nurtured my talent, even as she also shared with me her conviction that I could not find a Black husband because I was too smart. Racism and sexism informed her perceptions of Black masculinity. She had no experience with Black males. She felt she was preparing me for the real world, so I would understand the price I would pay for choosing to be an educated, independent woman. When I encountered her in my adult years and we spoke of this time, she expressed her regret for any bias she had expressed, calling attention to her own youthfulness at the time and that she had not unlearned about her racism. While her perspective on Black life interested me, it never carried the weight of my family values, of my experience in a Black community, where smart Black women mated and married Black men all the time. Naturally, Black parents raised in brutal racial apartheid in the South were initially more conscientious when the schools were desegregated, and their children were about to be educated by the very same white folks who proclaimed the need for segregation because of inferiority. They were mindful of the ways we were being taught. When I came home in the late 60s and told my parents that my white teachers were so dumb that they told us Black people had not written books, we saw this as just another gesture of white arrogance. It would not have occurred to us to allow ourselves to be the victims of racial ignorance. Given the white supremacist milieu of the times, no one assumed that white schools would provide us information about our Blackness. Given the times, no one was assuming that white people would provide information about Blackness. So it was a given that Black people knew that they had to educate their children about their history and of the truth about Blackness and Black people because they knew that no one was going to do it for them. So I don't know when we got away from that realization, but our forefathers understood that these people are not going to teach you your history, so we must do it. I'm not sure what happened or when that happened. I'm a Gen Xer, and I can tell you my grandmother, my uncles, my aunts were teaching me about Black history. I wasn't expecting to learn my history in school. And when I would read certain things in books, I would openly refute my teachers and say, this is not true. Now, did I get in trouble for that refuting all the time? Absolutely. I absolutely did. But I didn't care because I had people who were teaching me history. I had relatives who were in wars who would tell me about what it was like to be a Black man in the military. So because I had education happening at home and I had people sharing their lived experiences with me, when I would pick up a book in school and read something that was blatantly, patently untrue, I could refute it rather than just take it in and not, as she's talking about in this chapter, critically think. So I'm going to stop with this book because I got one more one more thing to read. So I want us to think about the fact that critical thinking is something that should be happening in your home. If it never reaches the public school that your child might be attending, critical thinking is something that should be happening in your home. Sharing your lived experiences with your child is something that should be happening in the home. You are the living library that your child can resource. Grandparents are the living library that your child can resource. Aunts and uncles are the living library that your child can resource. I'm going to say that one more time. No one assumed that white schools would provide us information about our Blackness. In retrospect, it is difficult to pinpoint exactly why this critical vigilance in regard to race and education diminished. Certainly, a combination of factors led Black folks to feel that they could cease the hypervigilance that has surrounded all interactions between white people and Black people prior to full-scale desegregation. Among these factors, the strongest was the belief that Black power militancy had created the sustained cultural context for Black self-love. Another factor was the rise in liberal individualism. Racial integration made it possible for Black folks to see more clearly that all white people did not think alike. When large numbers of individual Black students were welcomed into predominantly white colleges, when efforts were made to integrate and diversify public and private schools, many Black parents felt that the racial equality so long sought for and struggled for had finally arrived. The widespread institutionalization of Black studies also brought more Black teachers into the picture in higher education. Even though militant Black power activists consistently critiqued mainstream educational institutions, the reality was simply that a huge majority of Black folks were more conservative than they were radical. That's still the case. They were not listening to the militant voices that argued it was cultural genocide to let white folks teach Black children. In 1972, Don L. Lee declared, "To entrust the minds of our young to Europeans is equivalent to blowing their brains out ourselves. For all we will receive in return are brothers and sisters who are confused about their identity, purpose, and direction, and in effect have been tortured to a slow death." That's harsh. Despite the positive impact of Black power efforts to increase civil rights for all Black people, most Black folks did not really endorse the Pan-Africanism that formed the core of Black nationalist thinking. When writers such as Amiri Baraka called attention to the fact that unenlightened white folks would work to colonize the minds of Black children, very few Black parents took these warnings seriously. And I'm going to stop right there because I know somebody going to come in my comment section and say, my child ain't colonized. And all I have to say to that is time will tell. Time will tell. If you've done your job as a parent and educated your child on the history and reality of whiteness in this country as a construct, on the history of it as a construct, time will tell whether or not your child can stand up to racial inequality, to racial injustice, to the pressure to erase from the mind their blackness. Time will tell. But if you have not been educating your child, it's never too late to start. It's never too late to begin educating them. I want to read this poem for National Poetry Month. I want us to end on a good note today. African American poetry, another book that I suggest that you add to your repertoire. 250 years of struggle and song. This book has been making my soul sing. But this is a poem by Allison Joseph called 30 Lines About the Fro. 30 Lines About the Fro. The fro is homage, shrubbery, and revolt all at once. The fro and pick have a codependent relationship, so many strands, snags, such snap and sizzle between the two. The fro wants to sleep on a silk pillowcase, abhorring the historical atrocity of cotton. The fro guffaws at relaxers. How could any other style claim relaxation when the fro has a gangster lean? Diamond in the back, sunroof top kind of attitude, growing slowly from the scalp into sky, launching pad for brilliance and bravery, for ideas uncontained by barbershops and their maniacal clippers, monotony of the fade and buzz cut. The fro has much respect for dreads, but won't go through life that twisted, that coiled. Still much love lives between the two. Secret handshakes, funk bottom struts. The fro doesn't hate you because you're beautiful, or ugly, or out of work, or working for the man, because who knows who the man is anymore? Is the president the man? He used to have a fro the size of Toledo, but now it's trimmed down to respectability, more gray sneaking in each day. And you've got to wonder if he misses his pick, for he must have had one of those black power ones with a fist on the end. After all, the fro is a fist, all curled power, rebellious shake, impervious and improper. Water does not scare the fro, because water cannot change that which is immutable. That soul sonic force, that sly, stone-tastic, natural mystic roots and rhythm crown for the ages, blessed by God and gratitude. The fro. Well, I hope you have learned something today. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope you've been inspired. I hope you've been enlightened. And I'm going to turn it over now and uh, have some talk back. So, Pastor Ben, I'm going to click on you and I'm going to see if I can add you to come on. If you are listening by YouTube today, I want to thank you for your time and your attention. If you want to hear the talk back, we're going to be here over on Facebook at Black Table Talk page. So if you want to join us over there, please go ahead and join us there. If not, I'll see you tomorrow. Good morning.
Good morning.